Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Jeff Cann, the CIO of Encore Electric. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Matthew. It's a pleasure to be with you today and have a great discussion about technology and business.
I'm looking forward to it, Jeff. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and a hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass your security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gotten past their security. That's where CyberLink's intrusion detection comes in. With our 24/7 Security Operations Center, we use a combination of AI and cybersecurity technicians to see when a hacker successfully bypassed your security. So if a bad guy gets past your security, we'll know right away and be able to kick them out. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Jeff, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about Encore Electric and your role there as CIO?
Yes, Encore Electric is a specialty contractor. We employ electricians, and we typically think of our customers as the general contractors. So when a building is built, the primary subs are mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And so obviously every building has electrical systems, and they're pretty complicated. And so that's what our electricians do. We've now grown, since I've been here, Matthew, from 92 million to over 400 million in revenue. And we've grown from about 400 people to more than 1,200. And so you can imagine some of the things that we've had to deal with technology-wise, but more importantly, we're now operating in 5 states. We've got all sorts of different complexities. These men and women work on these job sites that are all over the western part of the United States. And so construction also has an additional dynamic in technology in that it's a complicated business to apply technology to. And really, when I joined Encore, they were really just entering their first wave of digital innovation, digital disruption. Some of the other 6 industries I've worked in already went through those phases earlier, like in the 90s and the 2000s even. And so ultimately for us, this has been a great journey of innovation and a lot of growth and a lot of quick moving technology that we can then deploy to our customers and make them better in the field. So it's been a very dynamic and exciting role to this point.
Well, I can't help but think, with 5 different states and that many employees, and you're now talking about not just office workers, but you've got, field technicians, right? People out there actually doing the hands-on labor of installation, as well as all of the support staff for that, right? The typical business kind of support people that most businesses have. So you've got to support that traditional, kind of environment, as well as now, all these field technicians. Can you take us through some of those challenges that I think maybe are unique to what you guys are doing, but also other industries that have, field technicians as well?
Great question. I think the biggest thing we've learned, 2 big things. One is, of course, the internet connectivity on job sites has been a challenge. It is getting better. Satellite providers have come along. It's significantly better than it's been. But that was a shocking part of it, because as our team started to rely more on technology, of course, now there's cloud systems. We need really good internet. One of the best stories we have is actually in Colorado Springs. We were building a job on top of Pikes Peak, a new sort of research center and visitor center. And Pikes Peak is about 14,000 plus feet. It's a mountain. It's beautiful if you're ever in that part of the world. And we're like, dang, how are we going to get an internet signal up to the mountain? So our IT manager, Kevin, was sitting in our Colorado Springs office and looked out, and you can see line of sight the top of Pikes Peak. And he thought, I got it. We're going to do a radio microwave up to the top of the. And so that was a really exciting thing, because the guys working on that job for 18 months, first of all, they're in the high, thin air. They've got to have oxygen around just in case, and all these different challenges of getting material up to the top of a mountain. Now they've got great internet. And so that's the kind of out-of-box thinking we've had to employ at Encore to give our internal customers, these electricians, these project teams, what they need to be successful. Because everything they do now, Matthew, is digital. They have all these, what we used to think of as blueprints. Well, that's all inside of a computer and different types of softwares. I think the other challenge we've had is as the softwares become more complicated and more adept at meeting the needs of construction users, that's where we really shine now. We try to help them take really great innovation, kind of like a black ops idea. If we hear about a good idea in the field, we want to talk to those guys and see what software they're maybe using and then decide, can we actually make that software available to the rest of the teams? And so there's been a lot of really great, exciting projects, and we can talk in more detail if you want to learn about some examples, but those are really fun for us because we give folks in the field a solution to a problem that they have. They can then build better, faster, cheaper, and then we're excited because they're excited. So it's a virtuous cycle of innovation.
Actually, I'd love, could you give us a good example of that?
Sure. So one of the challenges on job sites is capturing the progress of the work. And a lot of times that you can count how much material you've installed and so forth. Our leaders walk the job and they try to understand just visually inspecting and so forth. There's a lot of quality, of course. One of the more innovative technologies we've seen is imagine a Google Street View camera, 360-degree camera, and you can basically walk the job. You strap this 360-degree camera on your hard hat, and you can walk the job and record the video capture of that walk. That's a very powerful tool as the building is being constructed because you can go back in time and look at the progress. Well, so we started around COVID with the first version of this type of software called Struction Site 360. And then they got acquired by a different company called Drone Deploy, and they started getting more into the drone space, which for electricians wasn't a great answer because we're not going to really fly
Yeah.
drones inside a building. It's great if you're mechanical and you want to look at the equipment on top of the roof and so forth. And so ultimately, we heard about this new technology called open space. And so what open space did was take the same concept of that 360-degree job walk and then marry it up with the actual 3D building information model or BIM model. And so what happens in a lot of these construction jobs is people, the designers will model what the building should look like inside of a computer, what some people may know as CAD, or sometimes it's called virtual design and construction or VDC. Now we can, in this open space tool, we can both show the reality capture of the 3D walk next to the BIM model. And it's amazing what you can find, Matthew, in that situation. You might say, look at this beam. That beam looks like it's in the wrong place. Oh, sure enough, it is. We better let the GC know that we've got to make a change there. And so it's already helping us understand what's going on in real time on the job site. It's saving a lot of time and money for everyone. The other interesting part of this is our executive team, they review our construction projects on a monthly basis. And every executive obviously can't go to every job every month. But what they can do now is in these meetings, when they're reviewing the financials, we can bring up open space and the executives can see for themselves, what does the job look like? Does it look like it's being cared for? Is there a lot of debris and it's just not being
Yeah.
well kept up? All these factors I've learned impact the productivity on the job site. And so if you can have your executive team that has decades of experience in construction and know what a well-run job is looking like versus a not so well-run job, you can get that visual feedback and that triggers great conversations to ask, how are we doing? Are we still on time, on budget? Do we need to put some more attention to this job or is everything going okay? So it's really bringing that the reality of the job site through a virtual tool back to the office. And I think that's a really powerful example of innovation. And we learned about open space from a couple of guys down in Colorado Springs who had heard about it and they tried it out on a job and they said, this is so much better than the current tool we have. And we put together a plan and tested it out and did all the things that IT does to make that successful, rolled it out to the whole company. So it's been a great example of innovation and something that's really moved the ball forward.
Okay, that's super cool. I mean, that's just that's incredible stuff. And I'm curious, did the seasoned executives who have spent decades in the industry who are used to walking the job site, looking at the old blueprints, what was the learning curve like for them? I mean, I'm not, was it did it did they find it really kind of fascinating and relatively intuitive and like, wow, this is amazing. I don't have to travel, across the lines. I don't even have to go across town. I can see it all right here much more efficiently. Or was there a bit of a learning curve? Then once they got there, they were pleasantly surprised.
That's a great question, Matthew, because I've joked with my colleagues in the IT space that we are reluctant psychologists because at the end of the day, everything we do causes change. And one thing I've learned about people in my career is that most of us don't love change. Some of us are wired that way, but a lot of us get into routines and we're comfortable with it. And so, really, this was another change for them. On the one hand, I think they love the idea that they could see with their own eyes what does the job really look like. So that part, there was no learning curve. They're just seeing it on the screen. They're like, okay, that's fantastic. The other part for them is just the change part is really understanding how do I interpret the visual reality capture against the BIM model. And so I think that's where you have to just be patient and kind of be their guide and walk them through that process of change. And then folks on my team, we call it the construction innovation team, would do very specific training with the foremen, the project engineers, the project managers, so they understand how to really use this tech. Because, for example, if I see a problem, I can tag that now in the software, and that might become a punch list item or a future RFI, which may lead to a change. And so now we have basically one place to find those really important factors to make the job finish on time. And then our foremen really see the power of like, okay, now I can just get a report that shows for area X, here's the 5 things that we saw on an inspection. And if somebody did an inspection remotely, they might add a couple to the list if necessary. So it's getting people to think about how to do what they've always done with a different set of tools. It's a fascinating study in how people adapt to change, honestly.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on it. That is really been that is par for the IT course, isn't it? I mean, we are constantly pushing people to change, and there is a certain level of resistance there. No matter how much they want to embrace technology, there's no stopping it. And I think we live in a day and age where it's going so much faster than it's ever gone before. The innovation is just exceptionally rapid now. And you mentioned earlier that you learned about this from another group, and I can't help but think that it really is, as much as technology helps us do more, it's funny how important the human element and human connection is, like by getting together, sharing lessons learned, talking about new products and services and things that somebody that you're using that somebody else didn't know about, that they're using that you didn't know about. So I noticed you actually you founded, if I'm not mistaken, the CIO masterclass there in Colorado, didn't you?
I am
Or
one of the
mastermind?
founding members. Yeah, Mastermind, CEO Mastermind. So who have my good friend now, his name is Scott Smeester. He's the one who dreamt up this idea. And this was pre-COVID, so it feels like a long time ago. But him and I were both in this automation kind of vendor-sponsored events. And him and I were sort of the guys asking the really interesting questions. And I'd never met him. And he said, hey, we should talk sometime. And so a few months go by, we sit down and he tells me this idea about what is a mastermind and should we have one for IT professionals? And I was like, I'm in. And I didn't know at the time, Matthew, but I was the first one who agreed to his idea. So
Nice.
fast forward maybe 6 years, now we have groups all over the country and even members from all over the world. And it's a peer group. And so these different peer groups, it's somewhere around 8 to 10 people, and they break them up into different pods. We get together once a month and talk about IT things that the CIOs, VP of IT, the SVPs of IT all need a deeper sounding board to talk to. The way I describe it with people is imagine you've got 10 leaders and they have 20 or 30 years experience in IT. Think about the multiplier effect. All that experience comes together, that old adage of a few heads are better than one. So then we're able to, in a vendor agnostic way, there's no sponsorships. We pay our own way to be members. We can just freely discuss, hey, I've got a problem. I'd like to explain it to you. And then you ask me some clarifying questions as a group, and then I answer those. And then by then we're all on the same page of what the issue is. And then finally we invite sort of suggestions and recommendations. So I've got 8 or 10 people sharing me their collective wisdom. And it's powerful. It is such a great thing because I can take that same problem to my CFO or to my COO, and they understand. But there's with technology, as you know, there's above the iceberg, and then there's a lot below. And
Yeah.
so these are the guys that can get below the water and look at examine what's under the bigger part of the iceberg and really understand, hey, if you thought about this, what about this? And it's not just technology problems, it's leadership, it's succession planning, it's all the things that we struggle with as leaders. You just have an expert panel that you can walk with and learn from.
That's incredible. And I think it's so valuable because there there's so much information and so much benefit to be had by going to trade shows and all these conferences. My I don't want to call it beef, but my problem with it is that it is so vendor focused that it's all, for the most part, it's buy my stuff. And of course, we all have to buy stuff. I mean, we want to buy the right product and service that helps, our companies and our clients and everything. I think, but having a group of peers, a peer group where it is not sponsored by some by outsiders, but it can be truly just sharing of ideas and experiences and collaboration to help each other is so much more powerful. And I think that there really needs to be more of that. I know there are plenty of good groups out there, but it's something that I think everybody in IT needs to be a part of at kind of almost every level, right? Because it is so beneficial. I think even if they something like that were available at lower levels, that'd be great. But I think, it becomes one of these leadership things where at least at the leadership level, it's got to be there. And then that can kind of flow down, and good leaders can kind of, help the younger, I guess, folks coming up, help them learn about this stuff and grow into it. And you can kind of mentor them in that way. But I'm glad you guys started that because I think it's just critically important, especially as technology continues to, evolve so rapidly. Staying on top of it as a leader is it's almost a full-time job in and of itself. It takes a lot to stay ahead or stay current with the ideas that are changing, and then thinking about how that applies to your industry and your business. That's a full-time job. So kudos. I think that's a well done.
Yeah, it's a fantastic group. I highly recommend it for any listeners out there. You can just go, I'll just shout them out at ciomastermind.com. So fantastic group. Tell them Jeff sent you.
That's great. Well, you know what? Since we kind of touched on leadership there, I'd like to dive in, a little bit more and kind of get your take on it. Because I think a lot of people have their own kind of flavor, their own style of leadership. So let's talk about yours a little bit. What is your particular style of leadership?
I love that question because I don't know what I would have labeled it until recently when I went through an experience to kind of just understand, who I am as a leader, which was really powerful. But I've landed on this idea of human potential leadership, which for me is a combination of really a little bit of like understanding the psychology of people. How do we work? How are we different? How are we alike? And then what can we do to make sure that we realize our fullest potential as a team? And so for me, it's about encouragement. It's about giving people the freedom to try and even fail. And it's about the freedom to let them bring their ideas to the table. We kind of have a mantra now, Matthew. It's like the best ideas win. And I want the team to hear that in the sense of it doesn't matter if you just started last week or you've been here for 10 years. Like we want to look at each idea on its merit and weigh how its merit matches our needs as a company. And so that gets rid of some of the ranking and sort of, oh, John's the senior architect, he's the answer guy, and it kind of puts everybody on a level playing field. It also is surprisingly powerful because when you hire the right people, which is a critical part of this, you hire those self-motivated, those individuals who are striving for more, and you kind of just get out of their way and help keep them on track in one sense, but also help prevent them from, you know, not being too concerned about themselves, but really more, how am I concerning myself with serving others? And so really that's another dynamic is that servant leadership. So for me, it's funny, as a technology leader, I started out in software development, but I'm really more of a people focused manager than anything, I would say at this point. And that's really a powerful way to look at. So that's kind of my brand, I would say. It's about people first. How do we empower them to be really live their best selves while they're in the office or while they're working? So I think that's a really important part of it.
I love that. Now, let me ask you, how do you find those self-motivated people? You said that that's an important part of hiring, and I think a lot of people kind of struggle in the hiring portion, and finding the right people. Is it just do you have a process that you've developed along the way to, or a way of kind of picking those out and then seeing like, oh, that they're self-motivating, or if I ask them certain things, I know they're
Mhm.
self-motivating if they do these things? Or how do you find those self-motivated people?
It's interesting because the first few people I ever had to hire, I ended up letting go because I was terrible at like understanding. I had one person who had a great resume and I just was like, oh, I'm sold. And, I didn't really
Yeah.
take the time to kind of understand. And so that led to my first version of how to interview people, which was based on asking them some behavioral questions. Like, for example, what would you do in a situation when you and your boss disagree? What do you do when you have multiple deadlines and projects? Those kinds of questions, and to see how do they respond to a dynamic environment. And that worked really well for a long time. And then we happened upon a great book called Who, which was written by a couple of guys who've hired many thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people on behalf of their clients, right? And so I highly recommend we adopted the Who method. And in a nutshell, you're basically going to define who do you want to fill this role? And by having that definition, then you have a much better chance. And there's a methodology of asking the right questions and so forth. I won't go through that in detail, but there is a method of how you interview. And at the end of the day, you come out with a really good idea of, is this person the right fit for that role? It's interesting, Matthew, because I've had people we've taken through the process that by the end of that half day of interviews, both we and they have recognized they're actually not the right person. I had one woman actually say to me, she goes, I would love to do this job. I know I'm not the right person. I just feel like we should hang out and get to know each other. And that was a powerful moment for me to recognize that this process of Who had built up so much trust in such a short amount of time that she was willing to be vulnerable in one sense and just really open herself up. And most people are so guarded in the interview process. This process is purposely designed for them to feel comfortable and kind of just get into more conversational mode instead of interview mode. So I think if your listeners follow that methodology, we swear by it. And then when you bring in the right person, then all the things about human potential leadership can come into place. If I have someone who's not in the right person, so to speak, I'm spending a lot more cycles trying to bring them up, right? And what we have this rule on our team, we have to hire people. We call them A, B, and C players. That's from the book. And if you think about it, if you hire a B or a C player, meaning they're average or slightly above average, the amount of time you have to spend with them that you could be spending on strategic items and other more important things is significant. But if you hire A players, really high potential ones, you just sort of like you have that gift of time back as a leader that you can then focus on the most important things. And no longer are you bound to the tyranny of the urgent because you're working with this C player who constantly needs your help or input or whatnot. So, and I'm not saying we don't give people input and everything, but the difference between a C player and an A player is significant in how they conduct their work. And for me, that's how this virtuous cycle of building a great team works.
All right. Well, I'm definitely going to be reading that book. It strikes me that this the way you talk about it and the way you talk about even hiring people, it's pretty clear that your focus or your mindset is more of an abundance type of mindset. I talk to a lot of people, and their view of the the workforce, the potential, employees, is one of kind of scarcity. Like, good people are hard to find. And there's a lot of this kind of negative perspective on
Mhm.
the available workforce. And that's never been my experience. But then again, I'm not hiring thousands of people, so I couldn't tell you. So maybe at some level, maybe it's on different levels. But I think in the tech industry, I feel like there is, an abundance of good people, and it's if you put the wrong person in, the right person in the wrong position, it's not a good match, and nobody's going to be happy with it. And so perhaps, I'm going to get to a question here, I promise. Do you think that it's more that people are putting, kind of round pegs into square holes, and they're just not getting the right fit, and so from their perspective, they're not getting good people, but they're actually hiring poorly and fitting them incorrectly, so their results stink. It's not the workforce that's poor, it's their selection process that creates this reality of, ugh, this is a crappy workforce and nobody really fits. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's twofold. I think there's a great proverb: where there's no vision or hope, the people lose faith. And so I think you've got to have a good vision, right? And you've got to be able to talk about that vision as a leader, like all good leaders. And there is a technology vision for every company. Secondly, though, I think because of the nature of IT work, there's a lot of, I'm going to say on the Myers-Briggs scale, more introverted than extroverted people. And I'm a pretty strong extrovert. And so that's a little bit of an unusual combination to be in this role. But the biggest thing I would reflect on is we have to embrace the fact that in IT, we are actually in the people business. We are not in the technology business. And that is because we've not replaced our staff with a bunch of robots or a bunch of AI agents yet. And I'm not sure that's ever going to happen, to be honest with you, Matthew.
Same.
And because we're in the people business, my comment earlier about being kind of an amateur psychologist, I'm a little bit wired that way anyway. I'm kind of sensitive person. I'm kind of pick up on vibes in a room. And that's actually how I got asked to be in leadership, because as a developer, I was the voice of the development team. I was willing to say to the boss, hey, what we're doing here needs to be whatever. And so that encouraged me to really try to understand how people work, because I was very one-dimensional. I thought everybody thought the way I did, kind of naive mindset, as we do as young people. And so I quickly learned in leadership that most people don't have however they act and think is independent of what I do or think. And so really the time well spent with them is understanding how they work. And so we use different diagnostic tools to help us understand, who are you? What kind of person are you? And we've now, through experience, gotten to know, is this guy more of an engineering mindset or more of an admin mindset? Is this more of an engineering mindset or a development mindset? And you sort of start to suss out those nuances, because that's when you find people need to be in the right places. McDonald's, one of my first jobs in high school, they have this great management saying called aces in their places. And it's always stuck with me. And it's like, if you're great at fries, when the lunch rush is coming, you're working the fries. And then we'll give you some training on the counter work when it's not so busy, or vice versa, right? And
Yeah.
so it's the same with IT. If you're a DevOps guy, don't make that guy do a bunch of admin work. Go let him automate, be creative, find solutions. And so at the end of the day, we have to understand how people think and work and what motivates them. How do they solve problems? How do they see the world? That's how I think you can really match the right people with the right spot.
I, I think that's spot on. You mentioned, kind of the future, and kind of being replaced by robots and AI, and I can't help but think that, I think it's on everybody's mind all the time as we see, AI used in as a tool now. Where do you see it, kind of playing out for you guys, and then also kind of in the larger picture, where do you see it going in the foreseeable future?
Great question. In fact, very timely, because we just had our Encore board of directors meet at one of our suppliers called Trimble at their office. Encore, it turned out, built their office building. And so we decided to host their board meeting there so they could get a real good up-to-date briefing on how Trimble, the company, is using AI, both in their products, in their product development. And then we got to tour some of the robotics and just kind of augmented reality, and just sort of show the board kind of what's coming in the future. And so I guess I have a couple of mindsets. One is Copilot's been a really useful tool as just a general language model.
Mhm.
I think what I hear from my team and others is that if you want to get deeper into a topic that you're well versed in, you've got to go to a more specifically tuned language model like Grok and some of these other ones. Grok's cool because you can like pick which model you're going to interact with. And so there's some, and even now, if you go to there's an AI for that.com, Matthew, there's even, I typed in construction the other week just to see what kind of construction Gen AI models are being developed. And so we're seeing some traction there that will help with some parts of our business, like writing RFIs and sort of reading proposals that are 500 pages thick and helping us ascertain and understand that information so we can make a good design and plan for it. I also think, though, back to the open space comment, we're now seeing like actual AI automation design assist tools that can say, so there's this part of a building called the one line. This is the main hub of electrical for the entire building. And then off that one line, the different branches go out and power different rooms and whatnot. The one line's a really important feature of the electrical system inside a building. And so we have engineers and really smart people who design those things. Well, I found two different tools lately. One's called Augmentium that will like generate a basic one line design and give you like 10 options to choose from depending on the building specs. And so our estimating team is thinking about how do we use these kinds of tools, A, because they may help us find ideas that we didn't come upon, and B, what if the competition starts using those tools better than us? So we're seeing both of those kind of mindsets. And I heard this from my CFO, actually, who went to a CFMA, that's a Construction Financial Managers Association group, and he brought back a great deck. And the speaker had renamed AI from artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence. And so that's the way I've been talking about it here at Encore, because Gen AI is not going to replace us, but it's going to make us find new insights, help us understand things differently, just get us outside of our own experiences and try to see how that can benefit. And so people seem a lot more comfortable with that concept of augmented intelligence versus this will replace me. You and I both know as technologists that AI is just a really awesome chatbot at the end of the day. And chatbots have been around since the 90s. This is very sophisticated, but it's not the same as people in the media sort of thought it would be. I think really when ChatGPT became so prominent 3 years ago, for the first time, white collar workers were a little bit threatened by automation. And I think that's why it caused such an uproar. But really, it's a very basic technology. It's super complicated to make it work, but I don't know that it's gonna solve all of our problems just because I had a nice chat GPT conversation. But fast forward 5 years, 10 years, quantum computing, it's really hard to gauge. I'm not very good at prognosticating, but I do see these tools really being more focused on automation in the near term. And then some of the more fancier stuff, yeah, maybe that's on the horizon. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think you're spot on when it comes to the kind of augmented intelligence, which I think is just a great way of presenting it to people because honestly, that's what it's doing right now, right? I mean, it's augmenting what your workforce. It's really just a tool that's helping to empower you more. Oh, it's funny we had somebody Grove actually that was the name. It's this Web 3.0 technology company. We had them on the podcast. Their episode will air in a couple months, but they were 79-ish developers. Now they're down to 7 because of how they're using AI, and their 7 are just it's actually better than they were getting better results with 7 than they were with their 79 developers. So in that regard, I think that's it's a very great, I suppose, example of how once you're kind of super soldiered as a developer, oh, okay, great. And as you become a super soldier on the battlefield or wherever, I
Mhm.
think that's a great way of saying, look, great. Now, where do those? It's not a matter of like, oh no, now these people are out of a job and they won't. What are you talking about? Now there's so much more that will happen, and I think it comes back to that kind of mindset of abundance or scarcity. Like, no,
Mhm.
now look what I can do as a developer. Cool. If I'm not using AI, I need to start learning how to really use AI as a developer. And now I'm a super developer. I'm a super soldier developer. I can develop like I mean, you remember like I think we both developed writing code back in the day before the internet, and that shit was tough. You did not have you couldn't just go and Google your answer. You had to go figure that shit out on your own, and you were banging your head for hours and days.
Oh yeah,
And if you didn't
100%.
have somebody who had the answer, you had to freaking figure it out. And it was tough.
Oh
it was
yeah.
just really hard days. And now it's like, boop, you've got the answer there, and you're like, oh, how do I do this? And oh crap, that's how you do that. And it's fantastic. So now everybody is super soldiered up, if you will. So I don't know. I think it's really a matter of kind of self-empowerment. I think people have to start getting that view of I'm a super soldier, when it comes to my job now because of AI. Like nobody can be, I mean, come on, you could do more than 10 people. Like that makes you superhuman now.
Well, and
So
I think if we just think about the history of computing, when programs were first written in binary, it was a pain in the ass. And Grace Hopper came along and said, "This sucks. I'm going to write a thing called a compiler." And everybody's like, "What is that? Oh my God, this is amazing." And you and I use those so second generation was assembler, totally hard to work with. Third generation languages like C, C++, even Java to some degree, like those move the needle forward. I think AI is moving the needle again. And what people who don't think about this as much as folks like us do, Matthew, they get a little nervous. But I mean, like, I'm like, telephone operators are gone because a giant computer switches the networks,
yep,
right?
exactly.
I just bought my daughter a new iPhone, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, it's an eSIM, so don't worry about your SIM card." So I'm aware, I pay attention, but this is just the normal evolution of technology.
Right.
And to your point, those 70 or so people who lost their positions, maybe they're going to find other things to do with that profession, or maybe they're going to do something completely different. It's not a bad thing as much as it's just it's evolution. And I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle, especially on the coding side. So
Totally
yeah.
agree. Let me ask you, do you find that you are, personally more acceptable and kind of adept at change because you kind of live on the forefront with technology all the time, and you're like, well, I got to learn that. I'm going to do that. That's the new thing. And so you tend to embrace it more as as a tech leader, than say, I don't know, people in other areas of the business.
I think I'm schizophrenic in that way because on the one hand, let me explain. On the technology side, yes, 100%. I'm I'm sitting here thinking AI is a thing. We got to use it. Like I remember one of my colleagues when ChatGPT came out, he said, "Can we just turn it off? Can we just not use it?" And I was like, that's kind of like saying, "Can I just not have a cell phone, right? Or
Yeah.
and so, but that was his response. He was concerned. He thought, how is this going to affect our business? I'm worried. And that's really what he meant by that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good story in learning how people respond to change. So on the one hand, I'm very pro change. Computers change, all the things we just said. I'm very comfortable with that because I've seen that my entire career. When it comes to other types of change in my life, you can ask my wife. She's like, "Oh no, you hate change." And so I think that's the schizophrenic side where some things I have to go through my own sort of, process to sort of understand. And like, for example, my kids are, we're going to be empty nesters pretty quickly. So that's a change. I'm proud of them. I'm excited for them, but I don't love not seeing them every day anymore. It's not it's a change, right? It's natural, but that's an example of where I struggle with change. So I think like most of us, I'm a little bit on the both. But when I work with business leaders, a lot of them don't like change. And then they're afraid of technology. So that's kind of a double down of that scarcity mindset you mentioned, Matthew, where it's like, how do I then work with them? And I actually just posted on LinkedIn this week about this topic because I was thinking my role is to walk with them, much like a Sherpa. Like I'm kind of
I like
carrying
that.
this big bag for them and helping them just be with them. Before I would just try to convince them or argue with them or logic them to death, like hurry up and adopt the change. And I realized that doesn't work. So I really just have to be patient, be open to their change on their pace, on their terms. And sometimes you know this. You've seen with cybersecurity, it's crazy how much different it is even in 10 years. Like people may take 6, 9, 12 months to get used to an idea that we think is relatively straightforward. And so it's really about being patient on that long-term horizon, which is really important.
Yeah, and I can't help but think that maybe that's just a product of us getting older and wiser. And in our 20s and 30s, we were very impatient, and we were very much, you know, trying to logic people into it and convince them and just kind of plow through it. And I think there's this wisdom that comes at being about our age, where it's like, okay, maybe it's the lack of having that youthful energy where you could just pour
Mhm.
everything into every bit of it, and you could, burn the candle on both ends, and you could just go all out all day. And now you realize there's a limit to how much energy you have in your day, and so you have to start working smarter, not just harder. And part of that is in how we convince people of things, and sometimes it's just, as you said, being the Sherpa who is there for them, and helping them along the way without necessarily convincing them that it's going to be okay. Just kind of being there. And that goes right back to your therapist thing. It's funny because I tell our folks all the time, we're therapists first and then technicians second. And so it's, you talk them off the ledge, you calm them down, keep them from throwing the computer out the window, whatever it might be. But I think, yeah, I think that's part of it, is just learning in that kind of leadership role, that a lot of it is just having the patience to be there with somebody and kind of guide them through it, instead of forcing them to see the light.
Yeah, well put.
Um, Jeff, I got to tell you, this has been a blast. I think I could do this, all day. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and more about Encore?
Yeah, so you can learn more about Encore at encoreelectric.com. And then you can just find me on LinkedIn, Jeff Cann, Cann. And so I've got a lot of wisdom I like to sort of write about a little bit. Some posts. My buddy Ross and I are trying to convince ourselves to do more short videos and try to play around with that a little bit. So you may see us try to dabble in some different things, but I love the LinkedIn community. For me, Matthew, it's arguably a very positive social network. And I think people are just really, I love meeting people on it. And I think it's a great way to just expand our horizons and this whole global community that we find ourselves in. I think it's a wonderful way to connect, and it's how we were connected, Matthew. So I really thank you for your time today. I agree with you. I could spend all day. We could have some great conversations. So thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.